Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to have you all join us for this really special recording. I'm Lynn Yando. I'm the Executive Director of ISBM. And with me is Rand Mendez, my partner and Executive Director, and Dr. Ralph Oliva, who is faculty at Penn State and the previous Executive Director before me. And Ralph has within his head all of history from ISBM and then some. And because Ralph can't be with us during the members meeting this week, we'd like to have the opportunity for you to hear from him and hear a perspective that we knew would be valuable before we gave the members meeting. There are a lot of frameworks that we're going to talk about in the power of frameworks. There are so many of them, in fact, that we asked Ralph, would you kind of just summarize those for us? And after we got to about 15 or 20, we thought, well, maybe we should really kind of narrow that down and see if we can put some order to it. The best order that we could come up with was to say to Ralph, which ones do you think are the best, and put them in the best order. And so this is Ralph's list, which of course we support with ISBM. And he's going to talk to you about the top 10, the best frameworks that you ought to know. And if you don't know them, you're going to want to call us and ask more about them. We won't be talking about these at the members meeting. This is just the basis of where we start, the framework from which we build frameworks. At our members meeting, we're going to have some really amazing presentations. We'll be talking about the power of frameworks as we kick off with Laura Patterson. And then we're going to have a brand new B2B marketing analytics framework. It's its first ever that has existed, and you'll be the first to see it. And then we have some great other speakers that follow on. You'll also have a good coffee break with coffee that we send you. And don't forget to get your chocolate. Okay, so having said all of that, I want to turn this over to Ralph, who is going to tell us more about the top 10 frameworks. Every now and then, Rand and I might interject just to ask a question or to get some clarification. We hope you enjoy this. And if you think we've left out an important one, we'd love to hear from you at the end. So let us know. Okay, Ralph, take it away.
Well, thanks, Lynn. Thank you. And this really was sort of a labor of love. When we first started talking about frameworks, I just started working on a list. And again, I found frameworks very, very helpful in navigating particularly some of the tricky, chaotic times we're working with right now. So again, this if I left one out, or and you think I have, this is my fault. Okay, these are the ones I thought were important from an ISBM historical perspective, as well as ones we've used a lot with ISBM member firms. First thing though is, what is a framework? Okay. And I've always seen, and you need to be careful as you use them, but it's a tool, a map, a checklist, something that enables clearer, more complete thinking, particularly when you're dealing with a chaotic set of data or a moving environment, and you need something to help you think logically. Laura Patterson, who you'll be hearing from at the members meeting, great definition here, captures the process and the guide to getting the process operational. Another one I like that I found on the web, it's useful tools that help you analyze business issues and structure your thinking. So ideally, these should be tools that enable you to do more complete thinking. On the other hand, there's sort of a pitfall thing, and Rand and I and Lynn have seen this, is that in places where we've been working, and I've seen this with some of my students, where I hear, well, give me the framework for that. And I have to say, oh, wait a minute, we need you to think. This isn't a form to fill out. It's not something that shuts off creative problem solving. It should help it. Then I've also seen, well, man, I have a better framework than that. No, I have a better framework than that. Well, a good framework is a good framework, but we've seen that happen. Sometimes it can lead, if the framework is put in place, we got to follow the framework, and you see rituals or added overhead in implementing the framework. And again, it can lead to good thinking, but you've got to put it in practice. And I think we've all seen in our practice, we've seen at ISBM, unfortunately, that sometimes you put things together and it winds up in a binder, and you haven't really thought about how you're going to implement the outcomes of the framework as you go along. So this, it's a place that can be it's a set of tools that can be very enabling, but it doesn't shut off thinking. It should enable thinking. Okay, so for better or worse, here's the 10 we'll be going through. And this really, again, was a labor of love. It was great for me to just get them all in one place. And I would advise all of you, get the ones your favorite, that are your favorites in one place. So we're going to start with the ISBM Value Delivery Framework, which is right at the core of our track courses and many courses. It was one of the very early frameworks I worked on with Dr. Gary Lillian, Dr. Dave Wilson, and Irv Gross, the founding directors of ISBM. But the original idea came to me from a guy named Bernie Jaworski, one of our senior ISBM fellows. I'll hold this up here, that this was actually a framework that Bernie worked with me on before I got to ISBM at Texas Instruments. We were implementing a fairly complete track of our own, largely with ISBM's help. And Bernie helped us set the stage. So we started with that framework and then worked to come up with, from Bernie's first framework he gave to us. I wanted to make sure that at ISBM, we had a framework that was simple enough to be the central approach to building a complete curriculum with other courses tacked on. And it was a complete way of thinking through what went into a marketing plan. We needed something that integrated our courses together with a common lexicon of marketing. And we started with a simple 5-step framework. And then later, ISBM fellow Bob Thomas did us the favor of taking that and expanding it and building it into a planning framework for B2B marketing of the courses. So here's the basic 5 steps that Gary, Dave, and Irv and I kind of hammered out and said, okay, it starts with understanding value in and of the market and in and of my firm. Strategy formulation, the heart of that, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Designing high value offerings and going through the whole business of building valuable offerings and pricing them, communicating and delivering, and then managing through the life cycle. And typically there's a big arrow from the 5 back to the number 1 you learn each time. What Bob Thomas did for us was add the detail necessary. So, okay, the trends and C's analysis, as we call them, okay? So are we working with a common language? Do we understand the markets we're in? And are we going through customers, competitors, value chain, and our own company competencies? Again, segmentation, targeting, and positioning, core, and really the core of modern marketing, but particularly tuned for B2B. Designing high value offerings and building your first strategy for getting them to market. What are our objectives and goals? The whole business of market communications, linkage to the sales force, covered here in 5 steps. And then finally, are you putting metrics in place to make sure that you know where you're going, where you're not going? And by the way, you're going to have the chance to hear from a really good friend of ISBM, Laura Patterson, a real thought leader. And in my view, kind of the authority on marketing metrics. She wrote a great book on this called Marketing Metrics in Action, and she'll be sharing with you a growth framework that she has developed. So this 5-step framework that we had developed has actually gone to our members, who then take it and kind of make it on their own. And
Ralph, can I make a comment on that, please?
Yeah, jump on in on this.
Okay, great. Well, I did want to say that I consider in my career and my experiences that this strategic marketing framework, the ISBM value delivery framework being the first example of such, is the most essential framework of all of them. It defines the overall B2B strategic marketing process, and this value delivery framework is really the granddaddy of many companies' own strategic marketing framework. The next slide kind of shows you were getting ready to show the 4 examples. I'll just mention them briefly for you. But of course, DuPont's SMP 3.0, which I had responsibility for, was developed with the help of ISBM. And you can see, if you look at it closely, the roots of it come from the value delivery framework, as do Kennametal's Green Belt for Growth framework, GE's Gold Standard of Marketing, and another one of our member companies who's in the healthcare business, their strategic marketing framework. So this framework is essential, and inside of these frameworks are many other practices that have their own frameworks. But I think this as the granddaddy of all frameworks. In fact, today or tomorrow in our agenda, we're going to have Marmon presenting their journey towards their own strategic marketing framework, and I think you'll see the similarity to the original value delivery framework from 1994.
Okay, well, again, to a certain extent, we've coined the term. Some of these are sort of bespoke frameworks. They're frameworks that we've started with the key elements of the value delivery framework and then made it their own. put their own languages, processes, and other courses into it. Okay, so the value delivery framework, the high-end framework, the one I wanted to start with, it was one of the first frameworks I had seen when I came to ISBM. But when I took my first ISBM course, it was Irv Gross's Value and Pricing Strategy course. And Irv has been retired now for a while, but Irv is just an incredible asset to ISBM and has been an asset to the business. Spent a lot of years at DuPont and then became a professor, traveled around the world. So this is the core ISBM value taxonomy, and it's intended to focus on value, cost, and prices, and give us a clarification of how those are related. So I first saw this right in 1996, 97, when I saw Irv's course. It's the first ISBM unique framework I remember, because I learned this even before I got to ISBM. And by the way, this has a name to it. This, for those of you who have seen any ISBM courses, this is one that got named the value salami. And I'll explain that in a minute, because Irv always explained how price is a knife that slices value into a piece for the customer and a piece for the selling firm. And he used the term value pie. But as you'll see, these charts don't look like a pie. So Irv said, okay, we'll consider it a salami. And this is an essential element of all ISBM courses, where we start with the basic language of value. And I've walked the halls of several member firms where I've heard value salami being referenced. So let's go through it. It starts with a look from the supplier's point of view. If you're looking to build new value for firms, typically you'll find that we have to purchase materials, we're making investments in R&D, we add other costs, marketing, etc., and we get to a total cost. But ideally, we've created a new offering of significant new value, okay? True customer value. And that's the functional, economic, emotional, and relational impact that an offering has on a member firm's, on a customer firm's business or their life compared to the next best alternative. So that's what we're trying to do. From the customer's point of view, though, if we're bringing a new offering, typically they have something they're using now, and they're paying a competitive price for it and getting competitive value. If you're fortunate enough to build new significant customer value, functionally, economically, emotionally, and relationally, okay, then these two bar charts kind of show how they line up. And of course, in the business of marketing and sales, maybe the customer won't perceive the true value you deliver. And this is important to understand, is the customer may not acknowledge all the value you're delivering. They may not know it. Maybe we didn't communicate it well. So perceived value shows up on this chart. Then, as Irv mentions, price is the knife that slices this into two pieces. A piece for the supplier, which is our incentive to supply, and a piece for the customer, which is their incentive to buy. The value you're delivering to them for them to pass down their value chain, okay? And true value delivered to the customer, okay, may be higher than what the customer is willing to acknowledge, but their incentive to buy really comes from this line to this line. So this is a powerful, simple graphic we've used again and again. To me, it changed my life seeing this. It clarified for me value, cost, and price. And of course, we were dealing with a lot of situations, even in my own company, where we were setting price by saying, okay, here's our cost and here's the margin. That's how we'll set price. And we're moving away from that. So no, value-based pricing, you're looking at what the value is to the customer and how you divide this value. And again, when Irv said it was a value pie, someone in the class said, well, it doesn't look like a pie. So right on the fly to hear him tell the story is wonderful. He said, well, I just came up with the idea of value salami, and it sort of stuck. So price is the knife that slices this value salami into the incentives to supply, which hopefully includes a margin. But as many of us know, where is that margin? And sometimes that's elusive, because price and cost are essentially unrelated. A price should always be set based on the value you're delivering to the customer. Okay, so that's another one, a favorite, and it was good going through it. It's the core of a lot of our courses. The next one this is an interesting one, the whole business of pest, or sometimes pestel analysis. And I put this in here, and it's a fave of mine, because sometimes I see this whole piece left out of marketing planning, and without it, it's very dangerous. So it's necessary, if you're going to build a marketing plan, be thinking clearly with a broad lens. Sometimes it's binoculars, sometimes it's a microscope. What is the nature of the market you're looking to play in? How big is it? Where are changes going on? How do various players in the market compete? And are we able to, compete uniquely or not? And do we have the resources we need to know what we need to know, as well as pursue this market? Okay. So again, we teach it PEST, political, economic, technological, social, or PEST. Do we really see? And the important thing is not just the environment that we're in. What are the changes going on? And when we add the L, it's very important in many situations. What are the legal implications? Are there laws changing? Are there tariffs coming in? Are there other things going on that affect the opportunity? And ISBM fellow Liam Fahey is an expert in this area, and he really points to, you're really looking at the axes of change. So PEST, political, economic, social, technological, where are the changes happening? What are the patterns you can see? What are the discontinuities you can see? Because that can lead you to insight. By the way, that's another term that Liam had defined for us, a new understanding of some facet of the market that makes a difference, is a distinct break from prior thinking, and enables you to change, the way you go to market. So without doing this homework, I've seen some strategies that are just developed from the inside out without this homework. And I find this PEST or PESTL framework really very important at the front end of any marketing process. And this is one place, by the way, for ISBM members, where we have a detailed workbook to help you go through this. And if you'd like, again, you can certainly email Lynn or Rand, and we can make those workbooks available to you. But these are just, taking the framework and expanding it into a place where you can really get your thoughts together with a little more detailed checklist. Okay, well, now we're moving to one, and Lynn, Rand, and I guess I've had a debate with myself on this. Maybe this should be number one, because there are just so many 2x2 matrix kinds of frameworks out there that have been very, very important in terms of analyzing some sort of space where you have to navigate, okay? So the 2x2 matrix, it's basically a decision support technique. It has several names. Sometimes people call it magic quadrants, something like that. But it's, gives us a chance to think through the dimensions of the space you're dealing with and the alternatives involved in addressing the space. And again, for those of you who know me, I spent many, many years at Texas Instruments. And when I came here to Penn State, I had a chance to do some teaching and be a professor. So I went to the professors who were more experienced for their advice. And one of the things is, well, if you're going to give a business school lecture, Ralph, you got to have at least one 2x2 matrix in every business school lecture. It's sort of what professors do. And I've seen this to be true. So you've seen it before, but it's a very powerful way of thinking. What are a couple of variables, if you're going to do a 2x2, variables that define this space? And you can look at, put some dimensionality to it, even it's as simple as low, high. And does putting the alternatives you have in a 2x2 matrix like this shed some insight on how you would navigate? Okay. So again, I think the one most of us learn early on, and this is actually a picture of the guy who invented it, Igor Ansoff, the Ansoff matrix. Okay. Are you taking current products to current markets, which is kind of straightforward, relatively low risk? Or are you taking new offerings to new markets, diversifying, which typically is the highest risk segment where we see the most failures? And then, the others in between, are we just bringing new products to our current markets, or are we taking our current products to new markets? And the risk platform is well understood in these areas. So this is one you may have seen, the Ansoff matrix. Okay. Das Nariandas, ISBM fellow from Harvard that you'll be hearing from at our meeting, has created some tremendous templates for navigating B2B specifically. Das is a good friend of ISBM, very articulate. Be sure to listen to him. Okay, so here's this. Let's take a look at the buyers in our market. Let's take a look at our customers. How loyal are they? How low to high? Are they in our corner? Are they really loyal to us and our brand? And then what is the cost of serving them? Okay. So again, if you have really loyal customers with a low cost of serving them, those can be your most valuable customers, huh? And, but sometimes we don't think through this, or people will tell me, I don't have the data for this. Trust me, we typically have the data, to fill out this matrix. If you know you're working with someone who a firm or a buyer very loyal to you, high cost to serve, typically these are people who will pay you for value and acknowledge your value. They'll actually work with you to create new value. They're your partners. Okay. Now, again, sometimes, I'm going to go back here one, sometimes low cost to serve and not all that loyal, but these people would characterize themselves more as commodity buyers or easy switchers. And the chance would be, can we move these folks from this lower left-hand quadrant on up? Okay, or could we even move them to the right? But sometimes we can't. But the issue here is they'll demand less value, okay, and it costs you less to serve them. This is a place where Joanne Smith and our pricing guru basically says, okay, if you build a value menu, if you want lower price, what don't you need? And a good buyer in this corner will say, well, I don't need this service, I don't need this packaging. So you can lower the cost of serving them, lower the value they get, and then, and only then, lower price. Finally, there's this quadrant. And again, it can start out just by saying, well, we've got people, you know, buyers who are really unloyal, they switch all the time, and they're very high cost to serve. So we either, you know, we should move them up here, we should move them over here, we should move them here, or fire them. Okay, they can be, we can view them as pigs. Okay, they want everything for nothing, they're a pain to deal with. Or, as Das points out, sometimes you have firms in there deliberately. Maybe these are firms that are teaching you a lot, or they're your showcase accounts. But you notice I put this in red. You should be really careful here. If you've got a high cost to serve customer and they're not really loyal to you, put that in red. Make sure these showcase accounts really are delivering value to you. Probably another common one you all know, I probably wouldn't have to go through a lot, is the Boston Consulting Group growth share matrix, you know, with relative market share here, growth rate here, you know, and you can see the stars, high growth rate, high share kinds of customers you're going after, dogs or offerings that you're offering into the marketplace. You're looking at your product portfolio here, you know, low share, low growth rate kind of market. And then the cash cows, which we all know well, and then the question marks. And in the BCG matrix here, there are suggested strategies for each of these. One that's actually, this has been around for a while. It's been around, I guess, the article that I saw this in was was a 2014 article in Harvard Business Review. And it's certainly one that we're working with now. And you've probably all heard the term VUCA. The idea that, wow, what kind of markets are we dealing with now? How well can we predict the results of a particular situation? How much do we know about the situation? This is a very interesting way of thinking through the markets we're in today. And VUCA, you know, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And this article is a great article from the February 2014 Harvard Business Review, with the characteristics and some approaches for dealing with this. But an interesting set of axes. How much do we know about the situation? How well can we predict results and what's going to happen? I'll tell you.
Ralph, you know, I hadn't really known about this in 2014, but I fished it out in March of 2020. It was the watchword for the 2020 beginning of the pandemic. Boy, VUCA was everything we could think about. Absolutely.
You know, and again, I had heard this in discussions with some of the other fellows the same way, is that, you know, with VUCA being all around us, and I have to confess, when I first heard it, wasn't 2014. When I went back and looked at the original article, I discovered it was there in 2014. I heard this from Liam Fahey last year. He says, you know, we're in this VUCA environment. And I'm going, I gotta know what that means.
You know,
So
I think
you
that is often, and you know this about ISBM, you know, it's the research that leads the practice, right? So that it's out there a little bit before we get to it, yes, but that's valuable because I certainly don't need a tool after I've already finished, right?
So again, 2x2 matrices, use them, love them, don't have them in
Ralph,
quick thinking, but use them to enable good thinking. Yep.
Quick anecdote about 2x2 also. Similar to your faculty leader who gave you some advice early on, I actually got some advice one time that was said, if you really want to stand out in a meeting as a young marketer, you need to remember the rule of three. What the rule of three, by the way, is say, I have 3 reasons for doing this, or let me give you 3 examples or whatever, and people will listen. They'll listen if you start off with, I have 3, etc. That's the rule of three. But the 2x2, he said, always get up and show a 2x2. Similar to what you said. If you can come up with a 2x2 in a business meeting, in a business context, in a strategy meeting, you're going to stand out. I just thought that was kind of humorous because you heard the same thing from your
Yeah,
faculty
well, and
leader.
again, it's interesting in that it works. There's a lot of situations, particularly with the second year MBAs I'm teaching now, where I find myself saying, this is really interesting. Let's see if we can put this into a 2x2. What are the dimensions we're talking about here? And do the quadrants here enable us to think better about this? Not a replacement for thinking, a way to enhance thinking, particularly in a VUCA sort of environment. Okay, then, one that's famous that I had to include here because we've used it a lot with member firms, and many of you probably know and have seen this one, the Porter's 5 Forces Framework, the brilliance of Dr. Michael Porter. Okay, it's unique thinking, and again, this is a research-based framework based on reflections from a lot of the work that Mike Porter has done across many, many business. And one thing I found about using this framework is sometimes it points to things we used to call IWICs, I wish I knews. Because you'll look at part of this framework and say, we really need, and I wish I knew more about what was going on here. I wish I knew. And this is where we should invest some money in perhaps knowing more. As markets' needs and threats are changing so rapidly here in 2021, this is something I think as I was growing with ISBM, people were using this framework episodically. But now markets are changing so quickly. It's for leading edge firms, it's applied in almost a continuous thinking sort of mode. So here it is, the 5 forces, the idea that, and again, this particular chart, once again, Liam Fee had helped me with this, is okay, remember the trends that are going on. If you're an industry competitor, what are the substitutes for what your offerings are like? Who can get into the market and what are those barriers? What is the power? And you're looking at the power of each of these, the power of potential entrants, the power of substitutes, the power of your suppliers, which by the way now is critical. We're seeing across so many different categories of business that the real issue has become supply chain. In some cases, it's because of a shortage of workers to help the supply chain go. In some cases, it's things bound up in territories and things that can't be shipped. And then for your different buyers, what are the power of the buyers? How many alternatives do they have? What is your connection with them? So, the 5 forces been used a long time. And Liam says, remind, as you're going through this, keep in mind the macro trends, the pestle trends that color all this. So a great framework for thinking through the category you're playing in. If you're going to compete in the category, power of substitutes for what you're offering, the ease with which potential entrants can come in and change the rules of the game, the power of suppliers to either help you or shut you down, and then the power of different sorts of buyers in negotiating price and in the communication of value. Okay. So again, we do have a workbook on Porter's 5 Forces analysis, and if you're looking for one or more of these workbooks, as ISBM members, talk with Rand and Lynn, make sure you get them. Okay, another one, this was one of my favorites, and I really champion this one in here because I've seen this as a very powerful tool, the Economic Value Estimator Framework. Originally taught to us by Dr. Tom Nagel, who wrote the great book, The Strategy and Tactics of Pricing, and was head of the Strategic Pricing Group, or SPG, which is now part of Deloitte. So again, I've mentioned this, customer value, the way we define it and put it on the salami, it's the functional, economic, emotional, and relational impact that a supplier's offering has on a customer's life in many B2C situations or a customer's business, always compared to the next best alternative. Functional, economic, emotional, relational. And the challenge is, how do you dollarize all of these? What is this doing that's different that I care about? Can it directly impact how much money I make, my top line, or my profitability by lowering cost? How do I feel about making this buy from you? The emotional content, and then the relational impact. Do I have a relationship with your brand? Do I trust you? Okay, always compared to the other alternatives the customer has for serving this same set of needs. So how do you dollarize these things? And this is where Tom Nagel gave us this framework, which is very powerful, 2 ways. Okay, one way in terms of it's one place where you can put the competitive alternative the customer is viewing now, Talk about your alternative. What features does it have that are different from the current alternative? Positive, things that build value. And are there features that in fact are less valuable, or does it involve a switching cost, which can, add negative value to the equation? So features, something that it does that's different. What benefit does it deliver to the customer? How would you compute in currency terms the impact that it has on the customer's business? What formula would you use to compute that? What data would you need to compute it? And then what's the total differential value, and add it on up. Now, the key thing on this is, what we found is if you fill this on out, and we're working with member firms, we sometimes hear, well, I don't know what I need to know to fill this out. And this was the insight from Tom Nagel. So this is important. Listen on this. I don't know. How do I get this information? My customer's not going to tell me this. What we've discovered is that customers are more than willing in many, many cases to correct assumptions you put in here. So the key from Tom is put your best assumption in there and show it to your customer, okay? If you do that, you'll discover that customers are willing to jump in and correct an assumption much more willingly than they are to say, well, let me tell you about the value of your offering in my business. And Lynn, I believe you've seen this in action, huh?
Oh my goodness, I was completely blown away. My background is engineering, so of course everything has to be completely correct, right, in a spreadsheet. And I went to customers having learned this and thought, well, all right, I'll just give it a try. It does maybe help that I'm blonde, right? So I walked into the meetings and I said, so this is what we think. And of course, there were lined up customers ready to tell me how incorrect I was and to correct me with information that I am sure that if I had asked them out point blank, what is that information? They would say, oh, I can't tell you. But they're very happy to correct me. And that is just that human element of this piece that I think is so valuable, to realize that you can disarm all of your customers' information by simply just saying, well, this is what I think. What do you think? And they tell you.
And Tom points this out too, because it does show if you're bringing a construct like this to a customer, you're doing your homework. You really are in the, from their point of view. Well, these guys have done a lot of work in trying to compute this. And, if you've guessed way, way high, they'll tell you. If you've guessed way low in terms of the value delivering, they may not. But if you're savvy enough, you can get the cue that, wait a minute, I may have under forecast this. So this is a great tool, internal use, for helping you really think through from the customer's point of view, what are we bringing them? And then in discussions with customers to gather information. By the way, this is also a great tool for mobilizing the tribal wisdom in your sales force. Okay, sometimes, as you're thinking this through, you don't know how to get the input information and the value formulas, but your salespeople sometimes do. And something like this can elicit responses for them that are very, very valuable in giving you this information. Okay, something we're working on right now with many member firms is how do you build a strong and compelling value proposition? And again, this is the template that we're currently using. It was originally, I guess, credited to Dr. Jeffrey Moore, who wrote the book Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado. This is a tool for discipline. That's what this is about. And again, we have a tool in a toolkit that you can ask for on this. But it starts with, do you really know the customer and the problem they're looking to solve? Have you made the decision on what you're going to call the offering? Will this offering become a new brand? That's very rare. Or do we really want to use our brand with a more descriptive name? And what really are we competing against? That's frame of reference. What are we competing against? And sometimes that's not clear. We've heard stories about this where one story from a medical device company that was designing the latest and newest medical device. And they thought they really had something coming. What they didn't realize was a drug therapy was coming along that would make the surgery and the process that they were designing the device for pretty much obsolete. So they needed to be thinking they weren't just competing in a medical device frame of reference. They were competing in a cure frame of reference for a specific problem that needed different sorts of therapies, and they got caught short by that. Then the big one. Why do you beat the competition from the customer's point of view? What's the differential benefit? Okay. And that's often where we, this has got to be completely from the customer point of view. And that's the discipline that this sort of forces. And you need to know the next best alternative. And often we get caught up here, and I've heard this in my past life many times, and I worked for a very high-tech company full of very brilliant people who would say, our customers buy our offerings because of our technology. And I would have to, well, no, not really. So no, what do you mean? We clearly have the most advanced technology. Says, look, our customers buy our offerings because they make more money when they do. They're really more concerned about that. In fact, they're a little scared of our most advanced technologies because sometimes we can't manufacture them when we have low yields. This is a semiconductor business. So be careful of mixing up how you do it and the demonstration proof points with what the customer cares about. And then everything you do, every offering you deliver, should tie to the DNA of your brand and help build your brand, create brand equity for future sales. So this template I commend to you. It's really forcing a higher level of discipline in building the story for your customer. And it can help your sales people be more effective. It can help you do more effective communications and design on your website. Powerful framework. It got more powerful when we heard from this gentleman, Dr. Adrian Zlowacki, at the time was at Oliver Wyman Consulting. He said, yeah, while you're doing this, don't stick to your product and down in this lower left-hand corner. Be viewing your customer through the entire economic lens. How can you take things that are inside your company, like the powerful purchasing you have inside your company, and move that forward to help your customer in many, many dimensions, and, as you know, to cut across the buying center. And research shows right now in every big business-to-business buy, there are typically 5 to 7 people involved. And all of them have a slightly different view, probably, of what value is in this situation. So, in our courses and as we work with people, and brought this chart out because view your customer through an economic lens. Now, by the way, if you'd like some examples of this, Dr. Zlowacki wrote a great book right in the heart of the last recession called How to Grow When Markets Don't. And he outlines this, but he also gives some really juicy examples on how this works. It's from Johnson Controls, and we've seen some from Parker Hannifin. All right, well, now we're moving down to one, and again, we had some arguments as to whether this should be at the top of the list. Marketing, in my view, and I've done some real research on this for a book that I'm writing, I believe it's the most misunderstood word in business, okay? And I found, believe this or not, 70 separate definitions for the term marketing. And but one of the ones that comes up more often is, well, marketing is the 4 Ps. And this now the 4 Ps actually were created back in the 50s by Dr. Jerome McCarthy from Michigan State. Okay, well, the core of marketing is you make key decisions on your product, your price, how it gets to the market, your place, and promotion, a convenient mnemonic for the key elements of marketing. And actually, back in the 50s, this might have been all you needed to do. Remember, and most of you are too young to remember the markets of the 50s, but I'm usually the oldest person in the room, and I remember them. It was post-war. Everyone needed stuff. Everyone had money. So the real issue was if you put an offering on out there at any kind of reasonable price and you made it available, people just bought it. So the 4 Ps by themselves were probably enough, but not now. The 4 Ps are still important, but they're embedded at around step 4 of the 5-step value delivery framework. Have you really done the market analysis? Have you done segmentation, targeting, and positioning? Okay. Are you really designing the right offerings and pricing them correctly? Step 3, and then beginning to communicate them to the market. So between step 3 and step 4 of our 5-step value delivery framework is where the 4 Ps play in. If you start with these, particularly in today's markets, you may be jumping to conclusions that are just unwarranted. So still a great framework. Be careful of it. Another one, and it's been my honor really through the years to have a connection with Dr. Robert Cooper, Bob Cooper, who's just an incredible guy and was one of our very first ISBM fellows, actually. And this is, and it's known by a variety of names, but many of you are using some variation of stages engaged to bring new offerings to market. So it's one of the most widely used framework across ISBM membership, and Bob is widely recognized as the key scholar in new offering realization. I've seen it, in the B2B and B2C used to bring new offerings to market. Originally, as Bob said, this was designed to speed up the process. And importantly, before you committed a lot of resources to a new offering, identify the ones that weren't going to work and kill them. Kill them fast, and early, clean kills. And that's often a place where this process sometimes breaks down. We don't get the clean kills early enough. And, through the years, Bob has recognized that many firms have taken the core stage gate process and they've made it their own, but they've added a lot of ceremony and overhead to what's going on at the gates. So Bob is currently revising this to incorporate the principles of Agile, some things from lean manufacturing, to allow this process and this framework to be even more effective in today's markets where things happen so quickly. So this is a typical stage gate process, the five stage gate process with a post-launch review, where you're committing more resources all along the way. But Bob points out that all along the way, you should be testing these various at these various stages with customer or user input to be sure that that your offering is still on target to a customer base. By the way, a great set of tools on this is from a good friend of ISBM, Dan Adams, who created new product blueprinting, which essentially is a software environment for making sure you're constantly checking with the customer as you go along in the development. Another big, yep.
Ralph, I can remember my early years when I started as an engineer, and I was really excited to join the company that I did because they told me they wanted me to just invent things. And so we had lots of random acts of invention that never actually ever turned into a product, ever, because we didn't have any process like this. I remember creating some really amazing coatings and giving them to the marketing people in the company, and they said, I don't know what to do with this. Nobody asked for it. And so until we brought this process in, which was 10 years after I started, then finally we got some traction on actually saying, okay, so now we have a reason to take this all the way through and we can check on why somebody would buy it. But otherwise, yeah, it's just random acts of invention, no market. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're certainly not the only firm. That's happened to me and to other folks as well. Now, the key here, though, is how Dr. Cooper is tuning this process now. I mean, there are it's not one size fits all. Some of these things you really need maybe three stages and 3 gates. Some you might need more. It depends on how much investment you're making at each step. And Bob can really coach this process, but he's really working to streamline it now so that this happens a lot more quickly, particularly kills, so that you can take the resources you might commit to a failing product and put them in other places that create more profit quickly. Okay. All right, finally, again, this is one that I championed, is we do a lot of work, and it's a tough place to work, business-to-business branding, okay? And a little quick story is that, in many member firms, you'd be working with, if you ever did Myers-Briggs, you'd find you're working with quantitative left-brain people. They would come out Myers-Briggs, ISTJ, very analytic, and lose the idea that maybe the only way you have to compete once a market becomes a little more mature is through the right brain sides of your customer, the emotional, relational, your brand. So, brand is a pretty tricky thing because the way we define it, a brand is a relationship with a market. It's based on all of the experiences your customers have had with you. And it's tied to trademarks, and often there's confusion between trademarks and brands. Trademarks will trigger the brand. Trademarks are owned by the company, but the brand is owned by the customer. And only the customer can tell you what the economic impact will be. So if you're going to describe what you want your brand to mean, or you're going to test the market on what your brand really means, you're describing something that's multidimensional and complex, a relationship. Try describing in great detail, the relationship you have with someone else significant in your life. It's tricky. There's multiple dimensions. So one of the tools that we use here at ISBM is something called the Brandscape. It's a mix of things from great agency, McCann Erickson, from great thought leaders, Al Ries and Jack Trout, who defined the term positioning. And it's basically, at your brand, what are the values you really stand for that are uniquely yours? By the way, this is often the answer to a question that's been raised by Simon Sinek. If you haven't seen it, he wrote a great book called Start With Why. There's a great TED talk on this that many of you may have seen. So why did your company start to begin with? And again, this is not rah-rah stuff or stuff that isn't connected from the market. Okay, what are the values your company stands for? If your company was a person, what would its personality be? And then the essence, and this is straight from Phil Kotler, that the essence is, how do you want someone to feel? And listen carefully to this, because this was a real lesson for me. How do you want them to feel, not about the brand, but about themselves when they choose to work with you and your brand? What do you want them to feel about themselves? Position is, what is your distinctive difference between other things in the category? Do you own something that's uniquely yours? Capsule, if you could summarize the brand in a couple of words or one word, what would it be? And then brand elements, these are the things that trigger the brand, but often get confused with the brand, the logo type, things of that sort. Okay, so this is one framework for really describing either what you want your brand to mean, which you can decide, but to discover what your brand really means, you can use a framework like this to test with the audience to discover, well, what do they say your values are? What do they say your personality is? Do you have, you're a distinctive position, you're known for something. And we do workshops with member firms all the time on, can we crisp up what we want our brand to mean? We use Brandscape Workshop. Now, it's not the only such framework. There's the brand positioning bullseye, which has been around for a while. And some agencies use something like this, and there are others. But I like the Brandscape. I think it's easier to understand, and it gets to what's going on deep in the mind of the customer, relative to competition, top of mind. So that's it. That's my view on the top 10 with some commentary. We hope you found this a little bit fun. I found it fun getting them all together and looking back at how many times I've used these to help me think through things. But as we get out of here, I'm reminded of some wisdom from another ISBM fellow, Dr. Mohan Sawhney, who's, if you haven't seen Dr. Sawhney speak, find a way to do that. He's a genius and he's funny. And his comment was, Ralph, beware of tools. These are just tools, because a fool with a tool is still a fool. Okay, and this is a Sawhneyism, a Mohanism, and he's got a bundle of them. At every meeting, he'll come out with 4 or 5 of these. This is one of my favorites. At another meeting, he says, hey, look, if you get on the wrong train, don't look to see if this is your stop. Every stop is the wrong stop. And that's sort of part of this too. If you haven't done the right thinking at the front end and you're off pursuing something like a new offering and there's no market for it, don't be looking for a saving grace at gate 5. It's just not going to happen. Get your decision made earlier. So remember, I had fun doing this and assembling it for you. These are useful tools to help you analyze issues and structure your thinking, but they only really work based on your thinking and the thinking of your team and the wisdom you can bring. It's a way to help you through thinking, and particularly in difficult situations. So I thank all of you out there for listening to this. I had a lot of fun putting it together with Lynn and Rand, and I hope you found it valuable. Okay, and if you need additional tools along the way here, there is a set of tools available to you as ISBM members. Connect with Lynn or Rand on that. And if you want help on this step, on this process all along the way, connect with us. And the ISBM track, the set of courses we put together really goes through the value delivery framework and the key tools you need along the way to build a state-of-the-art marketing plan and be business to business. Remember, we got the special focus on B2B and special focus on the markets we're trying to navigate now and moving forward. So Lynn, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, Ralph, thank you so much for this. This was fun for me too. And I'll just reiterate what you've said is if you've got any questions about any of these, feel free to reach out to me or Rand and we'll be happy to fill you in. You referred several times, Ralph, to workbooks, which come along with many of our courses. So we'd be happy to help you or your teams get what you need to get better at what you're doing. And we have also this great assessment tool that might help you figure out where you might be skipping a step or forgetting a framework that you might be able to use. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you'll join us at the members meeting and we're good. Thanks, Lori.
Bye now. I'll just say thank you. Thank you for those of you who stayed with us on that. That was kind of rapid fire, and I appreciate it, the chance to do this for Lynn and Rand. And then COVID and other things stalled my trip. So But I think we had the recording together and it was covered in a compact way. So if any of you have any questions, or if you felt I left a big one out, were you waiting for a framework that should have been there? And that was, I guess, our big worry is a lot of these were my faves, and we had some arguments as to what should be in the list. But
So Mark, I saw you unmute yourself. Do you have a question?
No, sorry.
It's okay. I was just, I'm just trying to be attentive to the screen of names that I have here as I look at y'all, and don't feel like you have to turn it on just because I said that. But if there was something that Zoom could fix, which is feedback, that would be awesome. So as Ralph says, we had minor discussions. The voices didn't get raised for the argument about how many, but we did start with something near 20. So there are a lot of interesting things out there. Well, and we were talking earlier about that there were some lists online that we could see that people were putting together, but some of those were a little maybe outdated. Go ahead, Ralph.
Well, I think someone else was about to chime in, but the other thing I would say that's been valuable to me anyway through the practice is watching member firms share how they've used these frameworks in their business at some of our member meetings. Some incredible stories of how, it's one thing, these frameworks, they're cool and useful maybe, but we've seen some stories where actually firms have transformed themselves using some of these frameworks. And
that's a great pitch for the one that we have coming up later this afternoon, which is Marmon. They're going to share their story, and honestly, unless you've been through this transformation, and that generates lots of stories for yourself, you can't even appreciate sometimes how these things can really affect, because the really best frameworks don't just touch marketing. The really best business frameworks are across the business, right? So, all right, I'm going to ask again. Does anybody want to pitch in a question?
You got a minute here, Lynn? I think we've got another, what are we?
We have exactly 9 minutes.
Okay, well, people probably need a 10-minute break before the next presenter to be candid, but there are many examples that have come up through our members that we're putting together now on how these firms have been used, how these frameworks, have been used. Also, I guess as I look through this thing before we take a break, I would again, I thank you for sticking with this and for putting up with this presentation. It just reminded me of how constantly enthralled I am about what I have to say. So I'm sorry if I think I am guilty as sin of being very much in love with this practice and very much in love with these tools and seeing them in work and help people make money. I am guilty as charged. So you wind me up, I go on and on. I apologize for that. Okay, and I hope you found that valuable.
I think that a lot of us, that would be an interesting poll we should take, but I think a lot of us find the excitement in, can you be successful in some way, right? And your success usually measured in financial, but we all get excited when we can see a way to grow the market. And when you find a tool that works for you, it's amazing, right? So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Robert Lange says, just to start it off here to you, Ralph. So this is a great collection of frameworks. What was number 11?
All right. Okay. Well, you asked, I guess, and I did some thinking about that, about this. Number 11 to me, it turned out to be a 2x2. But since you asked, I'll let me see if I can pull it up here. I added, these were the ones I had. If you can see my screen, can you see it, Lynn?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I had the targeting framework. We had perceptual maps, a very specific one, the behavioral timeline. I had some other ones. So number 11 to me was the targeting framework. And that was one I was referring to because to me, that framework became much more, so targeting framework, there are many ways to do it where you put the segment attractiveness on one axis and your unique ability to compete, which is often the toughest thing to do on another. And this enables you to make decisions on which segments should we go after. And the big one on this for me was at one of our meetings, Timken shared this. This was a landmark presentation. I thank Brian Berg and Phil Fracassa who presented. It was back in 2013. I don't know if any of you saw this, but Timken actually showed us this chart that had all of their customers on it, all of them. And on the left-hand side, the financial attractiveness of dealing with the customer, and on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis, they polled their people on how well does our value proposition fit this customer. So they shared these data with us. I thought it was amazing, but these are all their customers. Obviously, they're anonymous. But it enabled them to really do some interesting thinking. This was, and by the way, this was a dialogue tool between marketing and sales. And this created real important dialogue between marketing and sales. Like, for example, look at the lower right hand of this chart. Here's a big customer in that little green ball, where we're not making the cost of capital with this customer, and we have an excellent value proposition fit. What in hell is going on? And then over to the left, we got this big honking customer that's another kind of blue ball. But it's a big customer of ours, a poor value proposition fit, and we're not making any money. Why do we have this customer? So and by the way, they went through how they did this value proposition fit, and they had a regular taxonomy for this. By the way, this was all shared at the members meeting. Well, here's this same chart a few years later, back 2011, and you can see they've transformed the company using this. They actually, abandoned one market, put extra focus on others, had new places to target. So sometimes these frameworks are theory, and sometimes these frameworks are practice. And then they shared this with us. When they implemented this segmentation approach, they were in the pack with their peer set all the way through on financial performance. Once they had a few months to implement it, look at how they broke out. They were able to take this to the bottom line. So that's the one I left off. That was my number 11, since you got me started. So you asked, but that's one of the fun of coming to the meetings has been through the years, is you actually get to see these frameworks put into action and produce results. And it was amazing to me that Timken was willing to be so self-revealing in showing this. But the Timken bubble chart has gone on to historical significance at ISBM in terms of, are you using these, or are you just learning them? So
yeah.
I
love the results chart, right?
Yeah,
I love the graphic that shows, how their performance just spread away. And of course, it takes a little time to get that momentum going and then running. But, when we had a question, the last presentation, how do I convince my management to do any of this stuff? How do I convince my management? I think it is if you can find a competitor's data that shows they're kicking your butt, that's what gets them, right? If I was competing against Timken, that would be how I get moving on segmentation, right?
Well, and another thing is at meetings, that's one reason why friends are so important, I think, is that if you're bringing this forward, you can bring a tangible case like this forward and just say, well, yeah, I know it's a different market, but if you look at their customers, their selling cycle, the complexity of their offerings, it isn't all that different from ours. Again, growing up in the semiconductor business, I didn't think anyone had any business like semiconductors. And Laura Patterson and I have had this discussion a lot. Oh yeah, no one knows the trouble I've seen. I'm in the semiconductor business. But then, we get to work with people who are making bearings, chemicals, and other B2B things. We find that these cases transport very well. So encourage you all to learn from one another. I mean, these juicy cases are ways that you can begin convincing management. Well, are those folks really that much smarter than we are? Why can't we do that? Okay.
So you gave us a nice segue with data and analytics for me to introduce Andrew Peterson. So I'm gonna